the shooting range. In this episode, how the Americans were building the Abrams for almost 20 years. The Tandem-MAI, a loser that provided the victory. Hotline. Developers answer questions that you've left in the comments. But first, let's start with getting inside the new German top, the Leopard 2K. Tigers, panthers, leopards, pumas, and even a cheetah. As you might have noticed, the German engineers were very much cat people. Today, we have one of that tribe in our test hangar. The new top tank of the German tech tree, also known as the Leopard 2K. This is only a prototype of the legendary machine, but it already can fight the Abrams and the T-64 as equals. Inside awaits a 1,500 horsepower engine, giving this tank an opportunity to go 50 to 60 kph off-road, depending on the surface. In the Fulda Gap or the fields of Poland, you can reach as much as 63 kph, until the first turn, of course. Reverse speed is also very promising, 50 kph, even though it'll take a bit more time to get there. Full 360-degree turnaround takes about 20 seconds. Basically, it's a very agile and maneuverable tank. The armament is another case, though. On the one hand, we've got a very sharp smoothbore 120mm cannon. The reload rate is only 6.7 seconds. Turret rotation, a whole 40 degrees per second. Even elevation angles are great, from -9 to +20 degrees. Well, what's the problem then? The ammo. The Leopard 2K has only two types of shells. The APF SDS, called the DM13, piercing 414 millimeters from 100 meters, and a Heat FS shell, the DM12, going through 650 millimeters of armor. The second one is good, no questions there. But the DM13 can't always damage some of the heavily protected enemy tanks, especially from a distance. On the other hand, you can save the main ammo for those monsters and use a great 20mm automatic cannon with 750 bullets to fight the less protected targets. Technically, the armor is spaced, but it protects only from 170 millimeters of piercing damage, which is almost ridiculous. On the other hand, the first hit won't always be your last. Of course, the tank suffers from APF SDS shells, but they don't damage it very much. If you got hit, you can set a smoke screen, repair, and get back in action. Just remember that all 8 smoke grenades detach simultaneously, and there is no ESS. So be careful. Don't jump in front of enemy shells, and use your smokes wisely. So, how do you play this German tank? It all depends on the dynamics of the battle. In the beginning, rush to capture a point. After that, either go sideways and greet those who try to flank you, or let those with better armor go forward and follow them. What you really don't want to do is rush through the middle of the map, drawing everyone's attention. The name of the tank speaks for itself. It needs to hide, find the target, attack, change positions, and continue the hunt. You've been waiting for some tank stories for a long time, haven't you? Well, here's one for all you tank enthusiasts. The M1 Abrams is one of the most popular tanks to discuss. Some say it's a lot better than any Soviet tank. Others that it can be penetrated not just with a rocket launcher, but also with an AK-47 assault rifle, in front and in the side alike. Well, today we'll add something to the discussion on the subject of the history of this US MBT. In the early 1950s, the Americans introduced the Pattern 3 into service and immediately started creating something that could replace it. At the time, the tank industry was developing at great speed, so there was no point in losing several years waiting till this one became old. The military wanted a lighter, cheaper, and more compact tank that could operate in nuclear war conditions. The engineers prepared two projects: the light T-95 with a 90mm gun and the heavy T-96 with a 120mm one. The tanks had to be so unified that the turret from one could have been installed on the chassis of another without the problems of different masses. By the late 50s, the prototypes were ready, but the program was cancelled. The military decided that the new tanks wouldn't be much better than the old M48s, so the works on the T-95 stopped and the engineers started working on the M60. Within a couple of years, the military once again was ordered to create a new MBT. This time, the development was partially American and partially German, as the Germans needed to replace the first Leopard. Technically, the MBT-70 was a very modern tank. All the crew was located in the turret, the driver was in a rotating capsule, and the 152mm gun with an autoloader could launch 80 GMs. Though there was a problem with the armament, as with the case of the T-95 project, the Americans had also closed the works on the smoothbore 120mm guns. The MBT-70 prototype wasn't completely ready. It had to be refined in so many ways, but even in this state it proved to be amazing. The problem was with the price. $544 million was a breathtakingly huge amount to spend on one tank. So this project was also closed. The Germans started developing a completely new tank, while the Americans decided to reinvent the same MBT-70, but cheaper. And they did. But the price was still huge. Plus, the military suddenly became disappointed with a 152mm gun. All in all, in nearly 20 years, the Americans couldn't find a way to replace the Patterns. Yet, they gained a great understanding of how one should not build an MBT, and the military realized what they actually needed. Now, they ordered a new machine, cheap and more traditional. In 1973, the completion for the project consisted of only two contestants, General Motors and Chrysler. The first presented a very traditional tank with a diesel engine and a 105mm gun. The latter ones placed their bet on a turboshaft. The first machine was cheaper, but the unusual engine gained the military's attention, and after a couple of corrections, Chrysler managed not only to refine the project, but significantly lower its costs, which won them the victory. That's how the Abrams was created. For its time, it was a well-protected and agile tank, and also quite deadly, especially after it got its 120mm gun. The question is, should they have replaced a diesel engine with a turboshaft, and which engine type better suits this tank anyway? But this question we won't answer today. And now, a story of yet another aircraft that you can get in our World War II Chronicles event. There's nothing unusual in how this aircraft looks. No, really, absolutely nothing. The idea of a plane with tandem wings first became popular even before the Wright brothers made their historical flight. From that time, it kind of coexisted with the traditional aircraft designs, developing in its own way. There are at least two great advantages of the tandem wings that really attract the engineers. Firstly, the plane is really stable mid-air, as both wings work on that without interfering with one another, unlike traditional biplanes. Secondly, there are two separate wings, which means each of them can be made shorter, and that would severely decrease the weight of the whole thing. Why is that? Because the mass of the longerons increases with the length of wing, not in direct proportion, but exponentially. It was a very serious subject in the area of wooden and mixed planes, and it had a lot of sense with the appearance of the duralumin ones as well. Before World War II, each country with a strong aviation industry had engineers who were the prophets of tandem planes. In France, Maurice Delanne created the AD-10 fighter. In England, the Westland Company created a whole family of aircraft with tandem wings. And in the USSR, the greatest of them all in this area was Pyotr Dmitrievich Grushin, an inventor and a future academician. From the early 1930s, he was actively searching for solutions to the tandem wings. First, he created a light aircraft called the Oktyabrionok, or in translation, the Little Octobrist, and even became part of the parade on Red Square, performing a flypast. Then Grushin decided to create an aircraft that could actually support the ground forces during a battle, since the war was clearly close. By the end of 1937, he created a flying prototype of the Moscow Aviation Institute Tandem, or simply Tandem-MAI. It could take off at a very low speed, had great maximum speed, and maneuvered like crazy, even though the pilot's technique would have been quite unusual to handle it. No wonder the military liked this bird. But of course, there were some problems. At higher speeds, the plane would not stay on course, and they had to calibrate it innumerable times until it could. There was no armor, as Grushin was creating it for his own academic purposes and had little idea of what the military would demand of his creation. For the same reason, the Tandem-MAI was flying without any armament, and with installed guns the speed dropped dramatically. The engine was a piece of work as well. There was only one that actually fitted in, and it was highly unstable, couldn't provide enough power, and, as if that wasn't enough, they made it in very limited quantities and distributed to the factories literally one by one. This was exactly the engine that killed Valery Chkalov, the famous test pilot and hero of the Soviet Union, and he was flying a perfectly normal Polikarpov fighter, and not an aircraft of a very unconventional design. Ultimately, the Tandem-MAI never reached mass production, even though it was approved and recommended for service. Instead, the military gained the Su-2, a classic strike monoplane aircraft far more easily motorized. You might well ask, what was it all for? Why would Grushin fight over the project, lose sleep, and waste the nation's money if it was clear from the start that the traditional planes would prevail? In order to understand that, let's remember why he became an academician in the first place. Have you heard of the S-75 Dvina defense system? Or possibly you've heard about its other name, the SA-2 guideline. Pyotr Dmitrievich Grushin was precisely the person who invented the surface-to-air missiles with tandem wings for it, and they had cost the USSR enemies a lot of aircraft. All that experience he gained whilst he was working on the Tandem-MAI, and it allowed him to come up with a solution to close the skies of his homeland from enemy scouts for good. And, since we're talking about it, the modern S-300 missile system, also known as the SA-10 Grumble, was also created under his control. All of it started with the Tandem-MAI, the little plane that couldn't. Get ready for the traditional last part of our show, Hotline, developers answering questions from the comments. The first question was asked by a user called Epic Blitzkrieg 87.
What is the biggest obstacle in adding rank 6 aviation?
Hi there, mate. The biggest obstacle would be balance, but not just in the battles. As our creative director Kirill has mentioned in one of the latest Q&A videos, it's quite easy to introduce only two kinds of equal planes. For example, the MiG-19 and the F-100, with not so effective first-generation guided missiles. But firstly, 5 other nations won't get that and will simply suffer. Secondly, the game would turn into a simple duel, and we don't want that. Thirdly, those guided missiles would be equal against each other, but still too OP against, say, the top-tier bombers. There are too many problems with balance of all sorts, and until we figure those out, the Tier 6 planes will have to wait. A player called GameAddict09 asks,
More Leopard variants as well?
We do have a new Leopard in the works, so stick to the future updates, mate. Then there's a question from Minnesotan Gaming. Possibly you'll remove the 2-step authentication and stuff to be able to access the marketplace, and also when will you be able to use the Steam money to buy Gaijin coins? Hi mate. No, we won't lower the security measures to access the marketplace, as that would increase the risk of your in-game stuff and actual money going into the wrong hands. You wouldn't want that, would you? As for the Steam money, can't really tell you anything about that for now. And the last very serious message was sent by The Waffle.
When can I request a V2 rocket strike in my mouse?
Are you sure that the V2 will fit into your mouth? That's it for today, but feel free to write your questions in the comments below. We do read them all, and you might see some of them answered in the next episode. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you on the shooting range.